Hi everyone, my name is Olivia.
And my name is Lene.
And we're in the DTT group. And for our study, we focused on evaluating the differences between spaced, masked, and expanding time trials in DTT procedures on retention of tacting sets.
A brief overview of how DTT is usually run. We sit the learner across from the table from the teacher, present stimulus after stimulus, and continue day after day until the learner reaches mastery of 80% time 6. So, Olivia, what's your mom's name?
Jackie.
Good. That's right. What's your mom's name?
Jackie.
That's right. What's your mom's name?
Jackie.
Yes. What's your mom's name?
Jackie.
So you can see that this kind of procedure could elicit some problem behaviors in the form of frustration, perhaps potential other behaviors like aggression or escape behaviors as well.
So when we were conceptualizing what DTT is, we broke it down to 4 critical attributes. So the first one is the presentation of a cue by the teacher. And then our second one is the opportunity to respond. So the learner may respond or they also may not respond. The third critical feature is feedback that's delivered by the teacher. And this could be in the form of corrective feedback or praise. And the last critical feature is the inter-trial interval, which is the time in between trials.
When we were looking at how to improve the actual DTT procedure, we decided to focus on that inter-trial interval. For mass trials, which is the example that we did with Olivia, it's 3 to 5 seconds. For space, it's a consistent time break between trials. And expanding time trials are intervals that elongate dependent on correct responding. So if the learner responds correctly, that intertrial interval gets longer and longer.
When we're looking through the research that is already out there around expanding trials and mass trials and evaluating which procedures were more efficient, what we found were some indicated that there were better procedures that were more efficient than masked, and some that actually said that masked was more efficient. So in the study by Smith, they discovered that their participants were able to recall the items that were taught in the expanding time trials condition much more often than in the mass trials condition. Then in the Carpick and Road Digger study, they found that when they were comparing spaced, masked, and expanding trials, that spaced procedures were actually more effective than masked or expanding trials on retention. They also emphasize that it is the delay in the presentation of learning opportunities that is the most important part for retention. Then, in the study by Magdaleni et al., out of their 6 participants, they found that 5 were able to master their targets more efficiently with mass trials when compared to distributed trials. And distributed trials is where the practice is broken up into a number of short sessions that are conducted over a longer period of time. Then in the study by Henriksen et al., they actually discovered that mass trials were more efficient than interspersed trials. However, they did find that interspersed trials yielded better results for maintenance of targets when compared to mass trials.
So in taking all of these different articles and research into consideration, we decided on a question: is there a teaching procedure for a DTT other than the usual mass teaching that promotes better retention, less trials, and improved generalization without the frustration that mass DTT can bring? Other procedures such as space or expanding the trials out over time might be more effective in improving those specific target questions, in improving how DTT is run overall. So we are going to demonstrate how each procedure looks. This is not the actual procedure for our study. It's just giving you an idea of how each type of procedure flows, space versus mass versus expanding. Feel free to play along and try and remember the different sets. Olivia is going to pause before answering to give you guys an opportunity to play along with us. This is going to be an example of an expanding time trial. You will see that as Olivia answers correctly, the time is going to elongate.
85123.
84160.
84160. 84160.
Correct. Now we're going to elongate it to 5 seconds.
84160.
Correct. This is going to be the mass trial. So the intertrial interval is going to be 3 to 5 seconds. This is going to be very similar to the initial trial that Olivia and I showed you at the very beginning.
67254.
53264.
53264. 53264.
Correct.
53264.
Correct.
53264.
Correct. At this point, Olivia probably has it, but we need to keep running because our mastery criteria or our set hasn't been completed yet.
53264.
Correct.
53264.
Correct. And now we've done a little bit of time. Let's say that our expanding time trial is now at 20 seconds. It's been 20 seconds or however long. And so we represent our expanding time trial.
84160.
Correct. Now we're going to do space intervals. These space intervals are going to be 10-second intervals in between, and that's going to remain consistent throughout each presentation.
15324.
72968.
72968. 72968.
Correct.
72968.
Correct. So very similar to the mass trials. She probably has it at this point. However, we do need to continue on with our sets in order to get a correct percentage.
72968.
Correct.
72968.
Correct.
72968.
Correct.
So when we were conceptualizing our study, there were a few things that we needed to consider and think about. So we needed to think about what is usually taught to learners using DTT, what we wanted to teach using DTT, what we could accomplish given the time frame of an 8-week course with a couple weeks to pilot and conduct our study, which age demographic we wanted to incorporate in our study, and how we were going to deliver our sessions over video. We also needed to think about how long we want to make our procedure and also how we could incorporate mastery criteria.
There were 3 different teaching sets for each of the different conditions: expanding time trial, mass, as well as space. So each of these pictures has a specific concept that is different between them, but shared variable features. For example, this teaching set, they're both circles. They share variable features of being black and white. However, this one is colored inside and this one is colored with expanding out. This one is swirls. The critical feature would be one or multiple. And this one is arrows. Shared features could be lines or feathers on the end. However, the critical feature between the two, one faces left and one faces right, these are considered paired trials. So these are presented together in the set.
So in our study, our independent variable were the 3 teaching procedures. We had expanding time trials, ETT, mass trials, and space trials. Our dependent variable was the retention of tacting sets. When we were collecting our data, we would mark a plus if both numbers in a paired trial were correct. So if there was a left-facing arrow that was tacted correctly and a right-facing arrow that was tacted correctly, then that trial was marked with a plus. We would mark a trial with a minus if at least one number in the paired trial was incorrect. So if we had the left-facing arrow tacted correctly, but the right-facing arrow was tacted incorrectly, then that trial was marked with a minus. The reason why we would actually mark our data in pairs is because in expanding time trials, it requires both of the targets to be correct before we can move on. And we wanted to keep all of our condition requirements the same across all 3 teaching procedures.
So the different intertrial intervals for each procedure. In expanding time trials, it's 0 seconds, 5 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, and finally, the mastery criteria for expanding is an hour. Space trials, we kept it consistent at 30 seconds, and mass trials, as it's generally taught, 3 to 5 seconds intertrial interval. For both math and space trials, the mastery criteria is 80% across 3 consecutive sessions.
In our initial design, we used an adapted alternating treatments design. We would alternate the order of our procedures run across the 3 procedures. Our tacting sets were also counterbalanced across participants. So if we tested the circle set using a mass trials procedure for one participant, then for another participant, we may use the circle set with expanding trials. Then if mass trials for a participant had their tacting numbers start with number 5, for example, then another participant would have their mass trials starting with the number 7. Our paired trials within the sets are randomized by assigning a number and then using a random number generator, place their order. So one pair may be marked as 1 and the other pair would be 2. So maybe the first time we would run pair 1, pair 2, and then we would switch it. So like left arrow, right arrow, and next time would be right and the left arrow.
Additional decisions that were made. Pictures were assigned a number using a number chosen by a random number generator. Each of those paired sets started with the same number. The sessions were run across multiple days for 1.5 hours until mastery was accomplished. We chose 1.5 hours because that's very similar to how sessions are generally run, with keeping in mind time constraints. Session delivery was via video call over the internet. And we did have a specific question for the pilots. which was what type of task is difficult but not impossible. We wanted these sets to be challenging, but we also wanted them to be able to complete the set.
So the initial numbers that we had for set 1 were 72967 and 73415. For set 2, we had 57810 and 53264. Then for our third set, we had 84160 and 53974. Both numbers in each set would start with the same number, and this was to help with carryover effects.
Oh, it's been a little bit of time. We've done a longer amount of time between showing the arrow.
84160.
Correct. The expanding time trial continues. This is our pilot data with my friend, and in baseline, she got 0%, which is to be expected. She's not going to know the numbers. She reached mastery criteria sooner than she reached mastery criteria for mass trials, and it took her 5 days to complete the tacting sets to mastery. Expanding time trials, because it runs off of different criteria than mass and space, we're not able to incorporate it together in the graphs with mass and space. So instead, we are showing the data through the number of trials to mastery. So for example, she took 8 trials to complete mastery criteria for that paired trial in order to go on to 5 seconds, and so on and so forth. In general, it took her a variable descending amount of time, number of trials, to get to mastery criteria. This day right here, on day 3, she did not meet mastery criteria for 30 minutes. When I reprobed her on day 4, the first trial that I presented of expanding time trials, she got it correct. She met and exceeded the expanding time trial mastery criteria. This is the number of trials that it took to complete each procedure. In expanding time trials, about 60, space, about 70, and mass trials, about 110.
For our other pilot participants, we also wanted to test 4-digit numbers and 3-syllable nonsense words. For the 4-digit number participant, we found that with space trials, the participant had much higher levels of correct tacks when compared to mass trials. They had also reached a 30-minute inter-trial interval for expanding trials within the first day. For the participant who tested with the 3-syllable nonsense words, on the first day, the participant had higher levels of correct tacks for all 3 procedures when compared to other participants who tested with 4 or 5-digit numbers. So looking at our pilot data, we decided that 4-digit numbers and 3-syllable nonsense words were not challenging enough for our participants. So we decided that we would go with 5-digit numbers. We also found that when we were testing with numbers, we were able to track additional data that we wouldn't have been able to if we did nonsense words. We were able to track data on the correct responding on numbers that are in the correct order. So for example, if something was tacted as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but they incorrectly tacted it as 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, then they still got 4 out of 5 of those numbers correct.
The numbers chosen, as Olivia already said, was the 5-digit numbers. There was a slight number change. It was reported by our participants that repeating numbers were difficult to remember. So 72967 became 72968, and 57510 became 57810 to eliminate those repeating numbers. We also realized that the participants during their breaks were going over and over the numbers in their heads, they're rote remembering, instead of actually recalling the numbers over a period of time. So they needed to do something during their breaks, and we decided for our participants that they could choose a short story to read during the breaks. They would read it during space breaks, and then they would read it for most of the expanding time trial breaks. To go over some of the definitions, paired trial is 2 tacting picture opportunities.
And then for our sessions, when we refer to a session, we're meaning 10 paired trials of mass, or 10 paired trials of space, or 10 paired trials of expanding trials. However, if expanding trials has already reached a 10-minute intertrial interval, then one session could also be just one paired trial of expanding trials. And these paired trials were always presented together in the teaching session.
And this goes into our decision tree.
So when we were looking at the time that we had to actually run our study, we realized that we had a time constraint. This study was actually supposed to take about 2 weeks to complete, but this is in total an 8-week course with a few weeks to run our pilot and our study during a pandemic. So we realized that we needed to make some changes. So we changed to just 1 day of teaching sessions that were kept at 1.5 hours. We also changed to continuously running all 3 procedures in that 1 day by alternating the order run. In our initial design, we were going to just run each procedure once each day, but now we're running them continuously through that 1.5 hour session, but alternating the order. And we would run our retention probes and generalization probes the next day. So it would take in total 2 days. We also created a procedure decision tree that would help us determine which procedure we needed to run next. So looking at the procedure decision tree, on our teaching session day, we would start with expanding time trials. And once we had run 10 paired trials of expanding time trials, but we had not hit a 10-minute intertrial interval, then we would run mass trials and space trials. We would alternate the order of the procedures run. So we may start off with running massed first and then spaced, but next time when we come back, we would run space first and then massed. After running the 2 procedures, we would go back to running expanding time trials. And if we had finally reached a 10-minute intertrial interval, then we would run our massed and space trials during that 10-minute break. When we were timing it, we realized that running our 10 paired trials of massed and our 10 paired trials of spaced, they would both fit really nicely within that 10 minutes. And we would also alternate the order of our procedures run like we did previously. On day 2, that's when we ran our retention probe and generalization check. So for our retention probe, we tested using the exact same exemplars that we used in teaching sessions. So our participants have seen the materials before. We also ran 10 consecutive paired trials per procedure. Then in our generalization check, we interspersed novel exemplars, which were exemplars that our participants had not seen before. And we tested with 1 exemplar per concept, so totaling 6 pictures.
The results for our participants are as follows. For participant 1, once again, baseline at 0. And this participant did not reach mastery criteria for mass or space or expanding time trials. Similar to our pilot participant, started off with a high number of trials and then decreased as time went on for mastery criteria for each of those timed intervals. Number of paired trials to complete each procedure, space is 40%, mass is 40%, and expanding time trials is 22%. However, interestingly, for the retention probe, it's all basically about the same. Expanding time trials is a little less, mass was a little bit more than space. And there's only a 10% difference between recalling in mass and expanding time trials. For this particular data, this participant did not correctly identify the numbers. However, some of the numbers were in the correct order. So we base these percentages off of numbers that were in the correct order. So for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if that was the correct answer, and the participant said 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, that would be 4 correct numbers out of 5. And for the generalization checks, interestingly enough, even though in the mass trials were slightly more correct than the others, this participant did not identify the mass the exemplars in the mass generalization. This participant identified, I don't know. For space is about 40% and expanding time trials is a little less than that. Once again, based off of numbers that were in the correct order. For participant 2, they did reach mastery criteria on session 4 for mass trials. Space needed to continue, as this day they got 70%, and they would have required 2 more trials to reach mastery criteria of 80% times 3. Number of time trials to mastery, they ended up doing around 3 trials at 10 minutes. Number of paired trials completed per procedure, space is 50, mass is 40, and expanding time trials was 18. For the retention probe, even though this individual did not reach mastery criteria for space, they had 100% retention for space. So all of the numbers were in the correct order. Mass, even though they reached mastery criteria for mass, they had the least amount of retention. And expanding time trials is somewhere in the middle between the 2 of those. The generalization probe, space was best, then expanding time trials, then mass. When looking at this data, we realized that for participant 1, they completed the same amount of trials. Expanding time trials is about half, but when looking at the retention probe, it's all pretty much about the same. So they completed less trials in expanding, but they got about the same amount of data correct in the retention probe. Therefore, we decided to find a % improvement per trial by dividing the percent by the number of trials completed. For space, that number ended up being 1.2% for this participant, mass 1.35%, and expanding time trials had the best % improvement per trial at 2%. Very similar data for % improvement per trial for participant 2. We did take into consideration while recording these numbers that for space, yes, they did 50 trials, and yes, they got 100% retention probe, but they still needed to complete 2 more trials in order to hit that mastery criteria. So when calculating the space % improvement per trial score, we did add on 2 more session procedures. So space is 1.4%, mass is 1.35%, and expanding time trials, similar as participant 1, is the highest at 3%. So our main finding was?
Our main finding from our entire study is that expanding time trials was the most efficient and had the best retention. And by efficient, we mean it required the least amount of trials to hit mastery when comparing to mass trials and space trials. Using exact IOA to calculate our inter-observer agreement, for participant 1, baseline was 100% IOA, our teaching sessions was 98% IOA, and retention generalization probe was 100% IOA. For participant 2, for baseline teaching sessions and retention generalization probe, it was all 100% IOA. And IOA was conducted for all trials that were run.
Oh, it's been a little bit more time of where we've seen the arrow.
84160.
Correct.
So some limitations of our study. First one is that retention probes were only conducted once the next day. Our initial design was going to have retention probes conducted 3 days or a week after mastery criterion was hit. So we only had retention probe data for the next day. We also had minor technological issues that were a result of using a virtual video call modality to run our sessions. So at times it was a bit difficult to hear our participants' responses, or we would need to have them repeat what they said. We also had a small sample size of participants. In total, we had 2. And also our last limitation was that with our teaching sets, with the exception of mass trials for participant 2, they were not all run until mastery criterion was achieved.
Some future research that could be run based off of this data, run the trials to mastery. You could also, it'd be interesting to look at interspersing the trials instead of doing expanding time trial breaks. Run with the actual demographic that may benefit from this, perhaps children with autism, and conduct the research in the setting in which the sessions would normally be run, as well as conduct probes over a longer period of time. It would be interesting to analyze the data and see if retention maintained after a week or 2 weeks or even a month for each type of set.
So for implications for practice, our first point revolves around research. We think that it would be best for practitioners to continue and to follow best practices that are documented in the literature. Right now, there is literature out there, and there are published studies that have documented the efficiency of expanding trials when compared to mass trials. Second point is to individualize our interventions to the specific learner. 80% across 3 sessions with mass trials does not always fit the needs of all learners. This may be appropriate for some learners. However, for other learners that may acquire targets and learn quicker, this would hinder their learning. So we recommend that practitioners individualize, and with expanding time trials, it would allow the practitioner to individualize their intervention to that specific learner's learning profile. We also want to emphasize the importance of education. So expanding time trials, they focus on the educational needs instead of punishment. For mass trials, when a child gets something incorrect, then mass trials basically requires the child to do that same target 20 more times until they can get it correct. And our last point for implications for practice is for practitioners to have the incorporation of expanding interspersed trials as a common practice in their everyday work.
So we're going to do a demonstration on how this might look in actual practice. It's not really practical to do expanding time trials, but maybe expanding interspersed trials could be something that would be easily implemented in actual practice. For this demonstration, we're going to pretend that the animals are our learning targets, and anything that's not an animal is something that's already mastered.
Dog.
Tiger.
Tiger.
Correct.
Tiger.
Correct. So she got that right. Now I'm going to add in a mastered set that she already knows to elongate the time.
Cup. Tiger.
Going back to the tiger, correct, to double check to make sure that it's still retained.
Cup.
Correct.
Dog.
Correct. So this is a new target set.
Tiger.
And this has been, I think, 3 now pictures in between. Correct, it is a tiger.
Dog.
Correct.
Cup.
Correct.
Umbrella.
Correct. A new master target.
Dog.
Correct.
Tiger.
Correct. All right, now this is a test to see if you guys can remember these tacting target sets that we have previously done with you. Feel free to play along.
5, 3, 2, 6, 4.
Correct.
7, 2, 9, 6, 8. 8, 4, 1, 6, 0.
Correct. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and I hope that it was enjoyable to listen to. Any questions about the research or anything that we did, please put it down into the message boards.